Okay, great. We're recording now. All right, welcome everyone to the February meeting for the Security Working Group. I will start just to request your approval for the meeting minutes for the last meeting on January 10, 2023. You can check those in the pull request in the GitHub repo for the group. It is linked in the agenda. Let me share it again for those of you who just joined on the chat. So there you can see a very quick summary of what was discussed in the previous meeting, but the recording is also linked there. So all of the recordings are there available in case, for those of you who are new to the group, you can follow any discussions that interest you particularly on past meetings. So if everybody's okay with that, you consider them approved.
I see they've been pull requests. Do you need someone with permission to merge that?
Yes, there are a few pull requests from past meeting minutes. So yeah, there's a little bit of admin cleanup needed there.
Okay, all right. All right, I'll go back and merge those. And if you want to send me your GitHub user ID, I can also add you to the write permissions to the repo.
Yeah, sure. So currently it's a fork that I'm making PRs with to the group's repo. Yeah, we need somebody with prover, I guess, rights, and then a reviewer to merge, I suppose. Okay, thank you for looking into that, Rafael. Right, so let's get started then with the first item in the meeting. I wanted to propose a discussion about security analysis tools for ROS code. So in the agenda, I linked a post that I made on Discourse where I was asking for some community input about this topic and invited anyone to comment or to join the meeting and contribute. The general idea is I see there's a little bit of a gap in how, I guess, the ROS community talks about or addresses the issue of code security in the project. Just because I don't see very much being talked about, maybe there is a number of initiatives, but very interested in that aspect. And so the main sort of community questions were, what scanning tools are you using in your project, such as static analysis tools, some dynamic analysis like fuzzing, and how are you finding the integration with ROS to work? So there are a number of projects that community projects actually that I linked in this discussion document. There are sort of wrappers for ROS to integrate some of these tools. You may be familiar with them, like the Qualcomm mixins, check, ements, ICOs, etc. And so those are projects that are interesting precisely because they make this iteration with ROS. And I thought that was something that there could be a need gap or maybe a documentation gap that the group can address. Hi, Edora. So,
hi guys,
yeah, welcome. So yeah, in this document, I had these discussion questions like that I just summarized, and I'd be interested in hearing your perspectives. Like if you use some of these tools, and especially if you feel like, and I'm throwing it out there, maybe this is not something that is really needed, but if the community needs more documentation to know how to get started, like integrating these tools and which tools to use. I know Space ROS has been making a big effort in this sense. We had them in the November meeting discussing this, and they authored the Ament ICOs integration, for example. So that's the main push that I'm seeing in that direction. But maybe there's more that we can do in terms of documentation or even supporting one of these wrappers for specific tools. So if you had any ideas, I did not get any feedback from the posts actually on DMs or answers. So I'm really open to hearing your perspectives and see what we can contribute from the group.
Yes, I'm not certain what other people are using out in the wild. Maybe we could look at some case examples of other open source community projects spearheading their own kind of uh, I feel like a lot of this, like in terms of quality assurance, is sort of done from a completeness and soundness perspective. I haven't seen this too often in terms of from just a purely security perspective. I'm like more like protecting against memory management bugs is more like a byproduct. Or security is a byproduct of that, rather than the initial objective, unless you're like looking at a crypto library. But I can see the merit in having sort of a more seamless integration style, where like just the same way that you can use the mixins to enable linters or code cleanup or style checking. You could also like, I guess, Space ROS is what they're interested in, is that having the memory management checks. Are there purpose-built tools just for in terms of security? It seems like that is very domain specific. Like in our case, if we wanted to make some kind of linter, like maybe we would check that your permissions aren't excessive in terms of you're allocating something that you're not using in your launch file or something, or we could maybe focus on something that's domain specific if we feel that's the direction we want to. But what kind of scope were you thinking of reaching?
So the main focus while I was thinking about this was tools that are generally available, that are open source for linting and generally reviewing C++ and Python code. You mentioned, obviously, there's some more ROS specific aspects like a launch file, but this is more like tools that exist that can be used on C++ code, obviously, for managing cases like memory management issues, all kinds of the typical ones. But I guess usage in the ROS community was the most interesting part to me. Like, is it being used? Are they being used to ensure the security aspect of the project? It's a big question for me.
I think maybe one direction this could go in is we see a lot of other like specific language ecosystems that are working in sort of tandem with Dependabot, like the property that I think GitHub recently acquired, or Microsoft acquired, in terms of doing the automated scanning of packages and dependencies. And so, if you're reliant on a upstream package and it updates because of a security patch or something like that, based on your inherent dependency, you get a notification to either bump up your version, and as well as some notice on if there are any compatibility or API changes. So like that, you see that in Rust, you see that in Python, you see that in JavaScript and TypeScript. In ROS, like I feel like that's something that would be kind of nice to have, in terms of like we inherently depend on packages, and we have sort of this abstraction model of federation. But maybe we don't have enough metadata in the way for something like Dependabot to do the same dependency or security modeling analysis. Like if a package updates, but it's not in your same distribution, that's sort of orthogonal to what kind of dependency you can necessarily accept without, overhauling your own package to target the next latest distribution as well. So it's not entirely equivalent, but that might be something worth exploring and see if how viable that might be able to do, because then that'd be good. That'd probably go a long way in terms of making sure all these leaf packages in the ecosystem, something that people don't necessarily upstream into, say, the OSRF repo org, that they are still inherently using the latest packages with all the security updates and vulnerability updates. Because like big projects like Move It and Navigation, they're pretty huge and they have a large attack surface that's even orthogonal to just necessarily the authentication and encryption of something that secure DDS use. So you could like do denial of service or something. And that would still be kind of critical in terms of robotic infrastructure. So if they patch something like that, it would be worthwhile to get sort of an instant feedback on all the other downstream packages that use that. So that, yeah, that's just my kind of maybe rant on what might be viable.
Yeah, that's definitely that's a good point. That's not what I had mentioned in my document, but absolutely. It's more like a dependency analysis, I guess, like SCA kind of tool, dependable. And I guess that would definitely detect when your package is depending on some package that has a vulnerability that has been recorded, like a public CVE that is reported and you need to update to another version that's not vulnerable. So I guess that sort of addresses a different problem of like known vulnerabilities that may affect your package kind of thing, which is definitely, yeah, valuable.
Yeah, talking about CVEs, we had the CVEs filed for the issue that we discussed one or two security meetings ago about the signature delegation or being able to sign your own permissions. So like I think 2 of the 3 DDS vendors have already patched the issue in their main branches. I'm not sure if they've cut a release yet, but when they cut a release and it's then packaged into the ROS package repository, having sort of dependent bot provide those notifications. I think that maybe the hard bit though is like currently in like the ROS ecosystem, there's very little that we ever like pin package versions. So that kind of metadata isn't as transparent or available for static analysis. But yeah, when those kind of issues get rolled out, like the middlewares kind of fix their own security vulnerabilities, it'd be really nice to notify everyone, hey, rebuild your own packages. To fix this particular target issue, to kind of transitively make and disseminate the issue of whatever CVEs were discovered.
Yeah, the thing is that they don't depend, that the packages don't depend on a specific version, right? They depend on the humble upstream, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as straightforward.
That's the issue, is that the metadata, the versioning isn't usually fixed in like a package XML file or their CMake or whatever. That can also be kind of frustrating in terms of when you're building, ROS packages. You're like, if you're building it from source, you're like, oh, what version of OpenCV did they use to get this deep learning network to work? But that's sort of the legacy that we've kind of built up just up to this point.
Plus you inherit a lot of dependencies, right? Because maybe in your package XML, it says, I depend on RCL CPP. And that creates a dependency of, I don't know, 80 packages or something that you're not explicitly stating there. You don't even know.
So, okay, there's a comment from Mikael on the chat So you're referring to the package XML capabilities. Yeah, there's definitely some issues that can be addressed there.
Plus, I mean, when you do apt update, it already will tell you there is these updates available, right? If people don't want to install them, I mean, that's kind of the mentality. A lot of people don't ever upgrade their packages, right? I'm sure some of us do not upgrade all the packages in our own computer, right? So how do we notify them that there is this ROS2 core update available, but you need to install it? It's not that you're saying it'll be good if you did. No, you need to. How do we notify that other than ROS discourse thing? I don't know. On the matter of static analysis, I don't know if you know about these RAG guidelines on safety in C++. It's a standard used to write the C++ code for, especially for automotive certifications. It's a subset of the language. And there are static analyzers that analyze whether you are complying with it, although it's pretty limiting, and most of the ROS2 code would not by any means pass that. But there are things like that. If that's what you had in mind, Jesse.
Yeah, I guess one tool that's being used in the ROS project for certification process is ICOS. That Space ROS is pushing for in this sense. Which, yeah, it's also a very, very powerful tool. And as I was mentioning before, there's this wrapper for ROS, the Ament ICOS, shared here too. And yeah, what I was generally going for is what we can do to sort of provide better documentation or promote using certain tools to address all these issues that you're bringing up. It could be dependency issues for known vulnerabilities. It could be just detecting your own issues in the code that you created, using the most common languages for ROS, like C++ or Python. Do you feel like the community might benefit from some sort of, I don't know, tutorials or better information on why and how to use any of these tools?
Esteban, I think your microphone is whacked out. I don't know what it's doing. Do you have a secondary microphone? You could also try typing if you want. That's a little bit lengthy. We can come back if you once you post your type out.
I guess one question that comes to mind is that, like, I mean, it's awesome because ICOS is open source, which often is one of the limiting factors. Like, for example, Misra, most checkers are not open source, and even the standard and the list of violations you have to pay to have access to, which like kind of like impacts usability. And then like what Robin was saying, like when things will depend about, for example, it's used massively in like JavaScript community as well. is because there is some infrastructure to just like generate like JSON package lock or whatever to with all the version of your dependencies that can get updated. And today, it's one of the limits is that like yeah, like we don't have this infrastructure in ROS, and we can't expect people to do like manual changes in a federated ecosystem to all like actually change their package XML, change their dependencies, rebloom, rebuild. It would be like it's going to be very hard to get critical mass on this. And now I'm going to let us read what Esteban said.
Yeah, Esteban, do you want to elaborate more on this question you put in the chat?
I think the ROS tooling working group is they're responsible for the ROS infrastructure CI pipeline. So collaborating with them to bring some more example workflows is definitely where I think the most experience would be. If we find if we settle on if there's any specific security domain static analysis tools, I say yeah, we follow up with the tooling working group to maybe incorporate that upstream or provide some more community examples. We've been using. Oh. You have links to those acronyms? I'm not very familiar. I'm sorry. That's neat.
It's threat sanitizer, and average sanitizer, and memory sanitizer. They're not a static analysis. You run your tests, your test suite, and then TSAN would complain about potential deadlocks and data races. Another sanitizer would complain about memory management issues, basically, regarding overflowing an array or writing out of bounds, those kind of things.
Yeah, and from what I remember, they used to be run also like nightly on the ROS2 build farm, but maybe only for like some core packages. I don't know if there is any way for outside contributors releasing ROS packages to get those triggers on the ROS build farm, or like, or then it would go back to like GitHub Actions, like to provide a simple set of templates that people can use to be able to like run those like nightly or whatever on each version of the software.
I'm thinking because we already have a mixins in Colcon for ASAN and TSAN, I think, right? That put all the compile flags that need to be set for those.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to use all of the meeting time on this, but yeah, thank you so much for all the ideas. It's a good idea to sync with the tooling working group, actually, if we go with integrating into CI, which obviously these tools will have to be. So yeah, that's good. I keep thinking about this, and we can keep discussing in the future. Right, so if nobody else has comments about this, maybe we should move on to the next item. Eduardo, you had 2 other items.
Yeah, it's just that we opened, we talked a couple of minutes ago, I think, about increasing or expanding the tutorials to get some deployment guidelines. And we opened a pull request. It's been reviewed by some people at Open Robotics and also Tomoya Fujita from Sony. But I think it would be good if someone from the security working group would also take a look, put comments, improvements, whatever you feel. It's not very long, right? But it's about making sure with a specific example or use case, you know, which files you should deploy to the actual robots, which ones you should keep on the organization, right? Because there were some paragraphs saying not all these files you need to deploy, but it was not very clear, I think. If you were just, you know, proofreading and copying and pasting from snippets. So that's
I took a look at the tutorial. I like the table that kind of clarifies and spells out what goes where. I think what you could I might add a maybe a PR to it to we could probably codify just about everything. So like I guess there is merit in having the user walk through, but they might like make a mistake in terms of doing all the file manipulation and moving. What we could do is just have it the user interact with the ROS2 CLI and then have the user read through an example of like a Docker compose in which that is like mounting the certain volumes and starting to containers. And that way, maybe you don't have to make an assumption on what the user has or doesn't have on their host. And they'd be left with a very replicable static setup on where the files went and get the exact same thing. But that's fairly minor. As it is right now, it's pretty good.
Please put that in the comment and we will take care of it for sure. We were actually thinking that we had an idea of maybe having, or if it was worth adding kind of a deploy enclave verb to the CLI or something. I don't know, that could STP the enclave, but only the files that need to be put.
That's something that's even since like SROS1, like Morgan Quigley was like, oh, it'd be really nice to have some kind of command do the deployment. I kind of felt that maybe that the key deployment was a little bit out of scope in terms of the key generation. But from a usability standpoint, I think there is merit in sort of combining those utilities under a common command line interface. But I think it faces sort of the same kind of big issue like with composition or multi-system orchestration, like with ROS launch. You know, they're trying to refactor dealing with multiple robots with one ROS launch invocation, or if you're trying to deploy multiple key material. So maybe we should look and see if there's already some existing tooling that's used in terms of key deployment that we just kind of leverage on rather than reinventing the wheel. But if not, then that's also something we could streamline into the CLI. Like just using SCP under the hood and just putting the target or checking that SSH keys are matching before like deploying the node's private keys and stuff like that. But then to get to your other example, when we're maybe using PK CS11, that kind of opens. Does that complicate anything in terms of what does it really mean into removing these keys when you're really just moving strings? But we can get that discussion a little bit later.
Yeah, that's something we explored. We started writing ROS2 and the CLI, and maybe now we have a better view of the diversity of deployment scenarios. One drawback, or at least thing that made us take a step back, was that if we are targeting like people using like TPMs and remote connections and many things, it would be like pretty hard to make a tool that actually does the thing people want. And because it's pretty sensitive material, we decided to take a step back and like not implement that. But maybe now like that the tooling has evolved a bit and the needs have evolved, maybe we have a better like set of use cases that could allow us to say, okay, we can target some of them and provide some more tooling for some common scenarios. But with a big disclaimer for everything else.
So I'll comment on the tutorial with the maybe using a Docker Compose or something like that to
Yeah, please.
indent. Do you want to talk about? I've read over the PKS C11 documentation proposal, and I've skimmed through your the FastRTPS implementations and the PR for the DS Common. I think the only thing the only two questions maybe I had were the conversation that was still left from the previous version of the PR in terms of priority or legacy compatibility. So dealing with like if the user has different file versions, like a PIM file or P11 file. Another one would be, I think the P11 file extension is used by something else, but is that sort of a common enough extension to maybe to assume? And then maybe lastly is the PKS 11 token in string kind of format. Is that a common way of passing PKS C11 configuration to other libraries or applications? Like if something else is using a TPM, is that the common way of addressing it? So I'm just thinking of other cases of maybe if the user was using something other than DDS for the middleware, but was using hardware keys to facilitate the encryption, it'd be it's fairly easy for them to use this URI, this PK711 URI to configure whatever underlying library and application for the encryption anyway, regardless of what the transport is.
I think maybe Kalle is a bit more of an expert on PKC than I am. I don't.
Yeah. So if I understood the question right, the PKS 11 URIs are pretty much the coming standard for addressing these requests or providing these requests. But how to actually give the URI, there is not really the standard way. So very often HSM manufacturers are using those wrapper files to store them. And this is pretty much because of the legacy solutions of giving just the file paths for the configuration files where you define the key. So, for example, Apache web server is, I think, still not understanding the PKS 11 URI, so they use files instead, and that's why the HSM vendors have those wrapper files. But yeah, to answer shortly, there is no standard way, unfortunately. Of course, what I think of is that alternative way is to give the PKS 11 URI directly to the configuration file in this case, but it doesn't really help if the underlying middleware changes because there is no standard. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Oh yeah, okay. So at least there's some precedent in this kind of approach. In terms of backwards compatibility or priority, I don't have too much to comment that like backwards compatibility is not my focus, but maybe Mikhail, do you have any comments? Because you went pretty deep in the rabbit hole when you were first creating that infrastructure in terms of RMW kind of figuring out which is where and what do and what to sanitize.
Yes, I guess things have changed a lot since I'm not sure anything I would say would be very relevant. But at least like my feeling, and I discovered like the P11 like reading all the work you gave me. But that seems to be more common, like looking and chatting with a guy at like developing Connect. They were supporting also like URI mapping to TPM, and when we explored like what kind of like support and hardware material could be used, it seemed to be like fairly specific depending on what like target or how you store and use them. But it seems like it's become more of like both a very common way of like storing keys and more standardized overall. So I think it should be fairly easily integrable now if we just have a standard way of specifying it. So in itself, it seems much easier than it could have been before.
Cool. It sounds like most of us are pretty comfortable with what's being proposed. So I'm going to go probably comment and give my approval. It's good.
Yeah, then my next question is what's left, or where should we go for this to be merged, right? If we are comfortable with it here, and there it has approval, so I think Michael can merge. I don't know.
Did the RMW folks have any comments? Like I just said, the only difference now is that you have to pass in a Boolean on whether you support PK, on whether the RMW supports this PK11 specification or not, or it can parse the token or search for the P11 file. I think that was the only kind of from the DDS Common API. That was the kind of the only extension.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a flag supports PKCS11.
Okay, well, the RMW folks are good. That's fine with me.
Okay.
Did we have anything else on the agenda or we want to talk about?
I don't think so. We opened up a request to fix the vulnerability of FastDDS. Will be ruled out. I don't know. Still don't know. Maybe a couple of weeks because it's probably will bundle some other things, and then we need to wait for the next humble SIG. But it will be on master soon, so that means onboarding rather soon.
Which vulnerabilities?
Sorry, what?
Which vulnerability? Yeah.
You can take a look at this. The thing is that if you use the certificates infrastructure created by the ROS2 CLI, it was discovered here that you can actually use your identity certificate to sign permission documents, which means that a malicious node can change its own permissions.
Okay.
If you use the keys, as are created by the ROS2 CLI, because it's using the same CA for both permissions and identity. And
right. So was this valid even if you are using intermediate certificates?
Yeah, the thing is that the DDS security specification explicitly does not allow to use intermediate certificates. So it says that you need to provide the root CA for permissions and the root CA for identity, right? And some of the implementations were allowing intermediate certificates, and that means that if you use the same certificates for both, then your identity certificate can be used to sign permission documents because there is a chain of trust. So this PR, what it does is that it forces that the chain of trust is not verified. You need to use the CA that the CA permission CA to sign permission documents. You cannot sign a subsidiary. You cannot sign them with a subsidiary certificate.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's a good catch.
In any case, I don't know if it makes sense for the. This I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion for the CLI tool to generate two different CAs, one for permissions and one for identity. I don't know. It's not necessary according to the specification and with this fix in FastDDS and I think in other vendor implementations. It's not necessary, but I think maybe it's still a good separation of concerns. I don't know.
I've asked a few times some folks in the OMG group on like what were the original intentions. They did say something, but it didn't stick with me. So it was a little unclear. But that aside, there's probably merits to make this more configurable. In the first iteration of sort of the tool, I made with like keygen and sort of a mix of event. This was more defined in terms of like a sort of a hierarchical kind of configuration file, and you can delegate on what signs what and what kind of CA you want to use and how the CA itself might be configured. Sort of like a replica of like what OpenSSL did, and then sort of its weird and in its own weird configuration language, but more like in a more structured YAML or JSON kind of setup. That we didn't end up porting that all the way to the SROS CLI, but that's something that I think it's really worth revisiting in terms of making the SROS2 CLI a little more configurable in how you want to initialize, configure, or use your CAs. Because the other cases, maybe the CAs are elsewhere, or one thing that SROS doesn't do that the previous iteration did is we sort of took a workspace approach on sort of on the iterative thing where you might have certificate requests. So that way the CLI could be used to generate all the certificate signing requests, and then you submit that elsewhere to get them signed so that you don't have to co-locate the root CA key material on the same machine that would be also generating the key material for the nodes. So if you had some very strict
that's kind of a more standard approach, right?
Yeah, something very more equivalent to like the web sphere web technology, but it was fairly complicated in terms of instantiating that from a ROS user perspective. But we should definitely look into seeing that, making that more viable.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite a complicated CLI tool when you combine the actual PKI server and then the client side key generation. So it was a bit confusing also in the beginning when I started to look into this whole SROS tool a couple of years ago. But and as an example, in our system, what we've been building, we ended up making our own sort of CA logic with the proper cloud-backed CAs, and then we are using the SROS on the client side to generate the client-side artifacts. So yeah, I agree what you just said.
And that would be interesting in iterating on that, because it seemed to us that like the initial approach would be hard also to gain adoption, because it was like basically a Colcon-like tool or an Ament-like tool that added a lot of complexity, and that's why we went like a much simpler route. But we see all the limitations of trying to like support only like some cases and bundling everything into one tool. it makes it like hard to use and not cover the cases people want to cover. So it would be interesting to like gather feedback of people like that I tried to use it for security purposes and went to a different route and see what could be done. I mean, I don't know how like much energy and time people would have to like spend on evolving SROS2, but it would be interesting gathering feedback and see like what are the different approaches we would like to explore. And I don't know if it answers your original question, Eduardo, but we could also look at like a very, very simple solution, because for SROS2, I don't remember properly because it was a very long time ago. But I think it was more of a matter of like simplicity that we just use the same CA for both. But I don't know how hard it would be to just have like two different CAs. And I mean, maybe it wouldn't be that drastic of a change to just like avoid that specific vulnerability in doing your default enclave and key material generation.
Yeah, I guess for the simple case would not be very difficult, right? To generate one instead of two, and then call one permissions, call the other one identity. I guess I haven't looked at the code really, and I think it's necessary to have a simple CLI tool, at least for as an entry point, as it is now. You know, based on the tutorial, you create a enclave, and you know it's 3 commands, and you're good to go. But it probably makes sense that also has to come more like a more advanced version where you can really configure how you do things. So it might be that it supports the two things, or I think that would be, you know, it could be that even it'll be already good if I could provide a root CA to generate the permissions and identity CAs from it, things like that. I don't know. Know that I have my own organization CA and I want to start with that.
If you have your own CA, it's about as simple as just substituting the files. The other thing is the SROS itself is also using symlinks to point to the permission CA and identity CA as if there were different CAs. It just happens that when we bootstrap
exactly.
the key store, it just generates the symlinks that point to the same file. So that end users could replace that before generating enclaves to use separate CAs, but it's always sort of been a balance on what people want to do out of band, either in terms of CA generation or key distribution to targets. So yeah, I guess we're just still figuring out what kind of scope and how much we want to facilitate within the same bundle tool.
I don't even know if how many people are actually using it. So if we can gather some feedback on what people miss from it, maybe that's a good starting point. Right?
It would be nice kind of have a survey and see how many people are using ROS with security EDS as of now. We just submitted a paper sort of recent on the topic, and one of the criticisms for the reviewer is like, how many people are actually using this? And so we as the authors were like, oh man, this is ROS. Like we don't really know like who's using what, other than you could kind of estimate maybe from the user analytics that's been published, this month. But that's not specific to what features people are using, or well, I guess we could figure out how many people are installing SROS too, but I think that's bundled within one of the default meta packages, so that's not
it
too
is
terribly revealing.
Yeah, it is. So I mean, everyone can use it. So the thing is, like, we don't know. My experience is that people that come here, well, except for Kale and their team, normally they don't use security.
So it may be worthwhile to maybe asking sorry, if they want to start at a survey on like Are you using security? What features are you using security? Are you just using VPNs? Or are you using secured software-defined networks? Or are you actually encrypting your DDS traffic?
How could we do that survey, or where should we point? I don't know.
I think we should probably reach out to Kat.
Yeah,
I
that's an
say
Scott.
robotics. She's now working on. But yeah, I think we reach out to Kat. Let's see. I start a ticket. We can start a ticket on the security working group community thread, and ping her there. And eventually the survey we can probably post on the discourse site.
I think we need to check. So it's good to ping her and talk to her, because I think one thing she wanted to avoid, and that's why she tried to be the focal point of surveys, is that like at some point a lot of surveys emerge from discourse, and so they wanted like for them to go through open robotics so that they could like, I don't know, like bundle surveys or like emit surveys at specific times to avoid having this continuous flow of survey requests to the community. So, but we can start at least like iterating on like what kind of questions we want to ask in it, and make her aware of it, and then see how it can, like when and how it can be submitted to the community.
Yeah. This I wanted to get Kat in on it, because you only get people's attention once, because otherwise they're like just gonna spam. So you want to make sure you ask your questions survey right. Cool. Anything else?
Okay. Then I guess we can continue the conversation on metrics.
Alrighty.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.
Ciao.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Hi, Robin.
Hey, Mike.
Sorry, I don't have that much time, but I just figured I would stop by. Hey, but you were on two different, you were connected differently. Definitely.
The video is recording. We can jump to another one if you want.
Yeah, right. I'll send you another one, but I have only 3 minutes. See you in a bit.
All right. Talk to you later.